Hello, welcome to Mining Now. I'm your host, Jared Downey. Joining me is Gowdy Molina. Hello, Gowdy.
Hello and good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I want to jump right into who our guest is today because Jerry Asp is someone that I first met at CIM Virtual 21. CIM will be back in person next year. We are all rooting for that.
Yes.
But Jerry was certainly a highlight of the show that we did there because he has such a history in mining that you could talk to him for hours and still only be scratching the surface. So he's been a real leader in the mining community as a Canadian, as an Indigenous leader. We will not cover all the aspects of his life today, but we're going to try to put a tiny little dent in it. So before we do that, Gowdy, let's give a shout out to some great sponsors who are helping us bring this episode to you.
Absolutely. Okay, so first up, we've got Savannah Equipment. Savannah Equipment supplies new and used mining equipment around the world, from placer to underground to ore processing plants. They have gold concentrating tables, trommels, and mineral jigs in stock now to take advantage of the high gold prices. Visit them at savannahEquipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day. Next up, we've got Fuller Brothers. Fuller Brothers Inc. has over 59 years of tire industry experience as the world's leader in providing non-hazardous, non-toxic products that reduce tire management costs for a diverse range of customers. The acknowledged formula developers of the globally recognized Tire Life. Fuller Brothers also produces other quality products such as PSF Plus, PSF Lubes It, Tire Cream, Dripless Tire Paint, Omega Tire Repair System, as well as select tire service tools and tire painting equipment. More information, you can visit them at fullerbros.com or by calling toll-free at 1-800-547-7785. Fuller Brothers, we have the inside covered. Next up, we also have the Bucket Shop. The Bucket Shop provides wear solutions for all mining bucket applications that extend life cycles of 3 to 4 times. They help clients improve productivity and reduce operating costs by providing innovative options, including their 5-piece cast lip system, cast heel shrouds, the mechanical 2 and 5-piece buckets with optional disposable front ends. Beyond buckets, they provide truck box assemblies and liners, custom builds, undercarriage systems, ground engaging tools, and abrasive blasting and painting. Begin your savings today and visit thebucketshop.ca. Of course, we've got CIM. CIM is a leading membership organization for technical content and creating connections in the mining industry. Mining professionals and students can access a breadth of technical expertise through the CIM Technical Paper Library, the One Mine Digital Repository, the CIM Journal, the CIM Magazine, and of course, attend upcoming CIM webinars. Whether you're working in the field, in the office, or at home, join the community today and find out how they can help you achieve your professional goals. Visit them at cim.org. And last but not least, we've got PowerZone. When you need a specialized team of world-class engineers for your oil and gas pipelines, dewatering, or any fluid handling needs, you want to visit powerzone.com. In addition to their inventory of rebuilt pumps, motors, engines, they also have an amazing team to design and engineer your systems, no matter the challenge, no matter the location. Get in the zone with PowerZone. Visit them at powerzone.com. Fabulous. All done.
Jerry, welcome to the show. Great to have you on. It's kind of nice because we've talked before, so we've met, but glad to have you on Mining Now.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for inviting me.
You've done a lot of speaking over the years. You've done a lot of negotiations. You've helped develop a lot of projects, and you've been a chief in your nation. Covered a lot of ground. Do you still enjoy some of it? What keeps you busy nowadays?
Well, I really enjoy, giving back now. After almost 60 years in the mining industry and traveling the world, now I give back. Now I try to help other Indigenous communities, whether they're in Belize or Honduras or Nicaragua or Ecuador or Canada, US or Sweden. Doesn't matter. I try to assist, show them the mistakes we made, and hopefully we can move them forward so they don't make the same mistakes we made.
What do you think? Actually, I've done interviews with you before. I've heard you speaking a lot before, and of course, there's a lot of. If anybody, we'll have links to some of your bios and that, so people could. You've accomplished amazing things. what are some of the mistakes, though, that you have made along the way, or that you see as that can be improved in Indigenous relationships and economical developments and those types of things?
Well, the biggest thing that most people make a mistake is that they think that First Nation people are opposed to mining. They're not opposed to mining per se or using the materials that we mine. They're opposed to the methods. And because the legacy, this is one time when the sins of the father are definitely vested in the sons. So the legacy of mining has caused a lot of headaches for a lot of First Nations and for the mining industry in general. And it's still, now they're starting to correct them. I just seen this week they've signed a big agreement between the Dene and Yellowknife and the giant Yellowknife mine. I mean, that is the environmental disaster waiting to happen by now. But now I see they've signed an agreement to help clean that mess up. So that's some of the things that I've seen are changing, and really big mistakes that the mining companies have made.
How did you deal with it when, I mean, I think your first deal that you put together was back it went back further than in the 80s, the early 80s, in the Golden Triangle. That's with your nation, the Tahltan Nation, I believe. How did you, I mean, the technology wasn't where it was. So how did you sort of, that environmental accountability, and I mean, did you have to let something slide back then, or how did you sort of approach it?
We did two things. First, Tahltans wrote their resource development policy before we ever negotiated the first agreement in 1987. And the number one, it's a very simple agreement with 8 points, but number one says there shall be no irreparable environmental damage. That's number one. And so I had this 8-point system to work with, and I could negotiate. And so it was pretty easy for me to negotiate. I had my parameters, and if they wanted to negotiate outside of that box, then they had to talk to leadership. But that was the Golden Bear mine. And so we negotiated that. That was the first one. But we didn't compromise our integrity. We hired some of the best environmental people that we knew at the time, and they told us what they thought was some of the pitfalls, and we implemented those into our agreements. We had environmental officers, we had HR officers, we had people like that on site at all times working with the mining industry. We were very hands-on, very upfront, working with environmental and HR to make sure our people were trained and brought along with the project.
There's something that I've wondered, just as I'm a leader in a very small scale, but when you're leading a community, you want the jobs. And of course, that's obviously a big selling point when a major company is coming in, is that they're giving jobs to a community, whether it's a community here in Kamloops or an Indigenous community, it doesn't matter. That it's one of the selling points. So I guess two questions. Did the mines at the time, did they think that was going to be enough, that if they offer a few jobs, that would be enough, and then realize, no, there's a lot more to it? And then to your side, was it ever a question to compromise so that the community could get jobs? Was that ever a balance you had to find, or did you know that you had to be very firm right off at the beginning?
We took it. This was how we started our negotiations. We were in a meeting, and one of the Golden Bear representatives said, "We think you Tahltans are being unreasonable." And one of the chiefs, Patadzurtsa, said, "Look, you, the resource developers, are taking away our way of life. We're just asking you to replace it with something that's equitable. I don't think that's being unreasonable." That was a premise we negotiated from. We said, we took away our hunting, trapping, our, as we called it, the bush economy away. Now we have to enter the wage economy, so you have to replace that. So that was the premise of our negotiation.
Yeah, now, because I've heard your story, I know that ability to negotiate, and that sort of is sort of baked into the culture as well, isn't it? The Tahltan Nation, like over 100 years ago, there was like large gatherings of these of commerce, right? That sort of the history. Do I have that right?
Yeah, the Tahltans were traders from time immemorial. There's a cave. My sister's an archaeologist, and she was on a dig on Prince of Wales Island off of the coast of Wrangell, Alaska. And they found a cave, and then there was a body, and there was 28 obsidian artifacts. The body was carbon dated to 11,600 years old, and every single one of those obsidian artifacts came from the center of our country called Ice Mountain. And so we tell people we were mining for 12,000 years, and we've been trading. We were the traders that worked with the coast. We traded with the Spanish. We traded with the Russians. We brought the goods inland, and then we traded with the inland native people. So we were the middlemen between the Russians and the Tlinkits and the Spanish to start with. And this is back in the 1700s. So we've been around a long time in the business world.
What about, actually, I want to go back to something that you touched on before I get into the next stuff, is you mentioned bringing in a team. You brought in HR and engineers, and you're environmentalists. You came equipped. Could have you done it without that? How important is it in these negotiations? And I think especially as young people, it's going to take an easy shot at things like social media and things like that. They see, so there's a lot of end result that you see. You see the final finished product of something and you think it's easy. But there was a lot of preparation that went into, not because, your chief saying that we think we're being reasonable, that's one thing. But then you had all these parts and pieces ready to go and backed up. Could have you done it without all of that legwork and all that preparation?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm a great fan of Will Rogers, a Native American philosopher, who said, you have to learn from other people's mistakes because you don't live long enough to make them all yourself.
Right.
So we knew where we wanted to go. That was number one. We had a vision. And so we needed to reach that vision. So we sat down, we said, how are we going to get there? What do we need to do to be where we want to be in 25 years? And we realized that we didn't have expertise in the environment. We didn't have expertise in this. We didn't have expertise in that. So we found people who were experts and we paid them and they trained us. But they developed our people. That was another statement that we made, that you have to develop our people along with our resources.
Yeah.
And so that happened.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
No, I'm going to say that's really the basis of how we made things happen, is because we knew what we didn't know. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, right.
We know we didn't know this. So we need to find somebody who did.
And then what about for you though? You've been in a ton of negotiations. You put together organizations and now you've worked around the world. Where did that come from for you? Who do you think who had a lot of influence? I'm sure it's not just one person. When I hear those questions, it's like pick one person. I don't think anybody gets developed off of one individual. Are there a few key people though that stand out that you really learned a skill or an approach from?
Oh, most definitely. The first person, of course, was my grandfather, George Zerza, who was the last true hereditary chief of the Tahltan people. And though he never went a day of school in his life, he ran a successful hunting area and hunting business, raised 18 children, and did all of these things. And was well respected and talked about everywhere he went. So I learned a lot from him. And in the mining game, I learned from my uncles, Ed Asp and Herman Asp and Freddie Hasselberg, who was a prospector that I traveled with and spent many years with. And so I learned a lot about negotiations and a lot about how to deal with people as individuals from those. But that, like you say, there's lots of people. My older brother, George, was the first Aboriginal person to ever graduate as a lawyer from UBC. So I spent a lot of time with him, of course. So these are some of the people that helped me with my negotiating skills. And of course, I took courses in project management and project development and contracting and contract management. Those were the kind of skills that I learned and went into. Although I was an underground miner and a diamond driller and whatnot, that was my background in mining to start with.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing that I'm curious about with you, with your story, is that you've also grabbed the wrenches. You've done both, and how important is that? You must still bring that into everything that you're doing. Is that when you're having these conversations, even if it's at a high level, you still have an understanding of what happens on the ground.
That's one of the big things that I tell people all the time. I know it's doable. You can negotiate any kind of agreement or you can write any kind of agreement and pass it over. But the other side, there's two things you have to remember. One is you have the other side who may not like what you wrote. And secondly, somewhere down the road, you're going to have to implement this.
Right.
And so when you talk about what you just said there, the practicality of it, I know it's doable. And I know what helps make things tick. That was one of the reasons why I assisted from day one that we have an assistant HR person at the Golden Bear mine.
Right.
Because even though it wasn't a union operation, this assistant personnel person who was Tahltan acted like a shop steward in the union. If any Tahltan had a problem, they'd go talk to this assistant HR person, and then they'd relay it back to me and to our leadership. And so, those are the kind of things that we worked at.
Yeah, I can't even imagine the difference that it made, honestly. Is it, as you've traveled around the world, is it similar challenges that you're seeing in Indigenous communities around the world, or is it pretty unique by case basis, or sort of what have you seen? I've seen it from a distance. I haven't sort of got firsthand experience, so I'm very interested to know your perspective.
When I started 35 years ago now in negotiating with the Golden Bear in 1987, they thought that Aboriginal people only knew how to carve totem poles and do fancy beadwork. So that was number one. I had to get around that. And number two, when we went to negotiate for contracts, you heard the term track record. So to combat that, I went into joint ventures. I brought in joint venture companies that had a track record and who were recognized as bona fide contracting people and could do the job to the specs on time, under budget, et cetera, et cetera. So that was how we got around that. And now when I work down in Ecuador, the sad thing is those people socially, they can run computers and do all this kind of stuff better than I can. So they're not so behind us socially, but economically, they're probably 25 years behind us. And that's where it is. But when I show them what the Tahltans have done, and I show them how we accomplished it, and the thing is, we're working with almost exactly the same mining company because a lot of them are registered in Canada, and I know a lot of the companies personally and know some of their personnel. So I'm not starting from square one, and neither are they. So my guess is they may be 20, 25 years behind us today, but I guarantee in 5 years at working at this, they will probably be caught up to probably only 5 to 8, 10 years behind us instead of 25. And my guess is that in 10 to 15 years, they'll be where we are today.
This is a bit of a tricky question that I have, is do the mines know what you know, and they're not helping the Indigenous populations move forward as rapidly when they could? Or is it that they need someone like yourself? And I know probably there's truth in both questions, that it's partially on the mines and they partially need someone like yourself to come in. But how much of it is I guess willful ignorance, or by not putting in the effort, knowing that they could make a difference, or how much of it is that they need people to be stepping in to help with these communications and within these communities?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't have a problem dealing with the top echelon in the mining field. Presidents, vice presidents, I have absolutely no problem dealing with them. Problem is the mining companies are so big that individual mine sites are a problem. Simply the people who give me the most problems, even today, are middle management.
Right.
And the reason for that is, I think, is that because the more they train the Indigenous local population, the more likely they're not going to be having a job. And I always thought that might be, they feel threatened by this new workforce. But in my opinion, that there is a very short-sighted way of thinking. I think that if they push the Aboriginal people, the harder they push them and move them up the ladder in the chain, the better it'll be for them and the mining company. And I don't think anybody will be displaced. But it's just simply that feeling. And I've seen it right from Golden Bear through Eskay, through the Red Chris mine in our country. And things are getting much better, but it's still prevalent, especially down in South America.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying 100%. I think that's absolutely true. I've had a very similar experience that when I've dealt with presidents and CEOs come on the company, they're generally, and of course there'll be exceptions, are some of the most generous people I've ever been in contact with, because they understand the need to collaborate. You can't get to that level of a company. You can't be the CEO of tech if you are not able to work with other people. Whereas you can be in middle management if you can distribute an agenda very well. You don't have to have that high level of compatibility with everybody as you do at like a CEO or a president. So I think that's absolutely true. And it's easier to feel threatened when you're in that middle ground where you can be let go. So I do get it. I wanted to jump. I asked you something when last time you were on, and I wanted to touch on it more, and partially because I have a personal connection to the Philippines, but I wanted to ask it more, and I didn't want to spend too much time on it because it wasn't really the context. You've done some work in the Philippines, and there was some interesting something you touched on. It was essentially that in that particular region, the community, or in that particular country, the community is supposed to have access to some of the revenue that's generated from things like mining. Am I remembering that right?
That's correct. Constitution of the Philippines says 2% of the gross revenue from resource development in a local area is supposed to go to the local area.
Mm.
So it doesn't matter whether you're in forestry or in mining or whatever, or if you put up a hydro project, it's a resource. So I assume it means the same thing, but it says 2% of that project is supposed to go to local area for infrastructure, schools, housing, roads, for that development. But from what we had seen when we were there, even though the mining companies were adhering to that, giving the 2%, local politicians weren't receiving the monies. It was going into the grand coffers.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not the fact that they don't have the laws there. It's just the implementation that's not happened.
Yeah, it really struck when you said that, and I'm highlighting the Philippines. I'm sure there's other countries that have a similar setup. I guess my initial reaction was anger, but then of course, then you need to start sort of working through it, because I distinctly remember driving through the Philippines with my wife, and there was a community that was, I mean, it's not a wealthy community by any stretch where we were. I can't even remember the name of it, to be honest, but. And I said, I don't even know where you would start. I don't look at this community and see a starting point. Like, you could come bring a school there, you could do a project, but it's got to be such a large scale, because that 2%, I mean, somewhere like the Philippines, obviously places down in Latin America, I mean, they're so resource rich. All over the world, there's these places that are so resource rich. They are not seeing the money that they have the rights to. Where should they start? Where do you see? I mean, we do have people around the world that watch this show. If there's someone there that's in the Philippines, I know we have fans in the Philippines watching, where should they start in these communities to start getting some of what they are owed? and start being involved in some of these projects?
You know, I tell leadership everywhere, you have to have a vision.
Mm.
The Tahltans had a vision. When I came and started the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation building houses, our vision was, because we had 98% unemployment in the winter and 65% in the summer, our vision was to eradicate and eliminate unemployment in our nation in 20 years, 25 years. That was the vision. A pretty narrow vision, but you know, everything falls into it. Then the second thing you need then is a strategy. How are you going to eliminate unemployment in your nation when, to be truthful now, as a chief, so I know, there isn't one program in Department of Indian Affairs geared to get you out of the doldrums you're in? Not one. I know, because I was a chief. I was asked one time after about 4 months on the job as a chief, they said, "What are you doing there, Jerry? How's things going?" I said, "All I'm doing here is administering my own poverty, because there are no programs designed to get you out of that mess." So our vision then was to eliminate unemployment. So the next thing you had to have was a strategy. So our strategy then was, we had to look off reserve to the resource developers, to the mining people, the logging, the hydro. Those were what we looked to. And of course, before we negotiated that, we had to write the Tahltan Resource Development Policy. And we wrote that. So now we knew we had a couple tools in hand to work with. And then the third thing, of course, you need to have is a vehicle to carry that strategy to fruition. And that's when we started the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation. So any leadership that doesn't follow that path is only doing it piecemeal and half-heartedly. You need a vision. And I tell this to every single community I go to. I say, you know, when you're setting up a vision, it's pretty simple. I have 3 simple questions I ask. The first question I ask is, where do you see your community or your nation or whatever you want to write a vision for in 25 years? Okay, pretty simple. And the second thing is, what do you think it's going to take for your community to reach that vision? And then the third question I ask is, what are you personally willing to do to help bring that vision to fruition? They're simple questions, but if you write those questions on top of a page, one on each page, and fill it out, it's not quite so simple.
Mm.
But if you give those 3 questions to every single person in your village that's over 16 years of age and say, answer these 3 questions, then you bring them back and you tabulate them and you put them together and see where you end up. Very quickly, it takes a lot of work, but at the end of the day, you know exactly where your community thinks they should be and what we should do to get there.
Mm. We,
in essence, did that. We didn't do it exactly by writing those questions out, but we answered them.
Right.
And of course, the people said, number one, we got to bring some pride and dignity back to our nation. And we're not beggars, we're Tahltans. So we're not going to be beggars in our own land.
Mm.
So I said, that's great. So let's do this. So we started to make sure our people were developed along with our resources. And today, we still have 0 unemployment. We have the lowest welfare statistics in Canada, probably among the very top, for sure, the top 5 in Canada today. The only people on welfare are elders and handicapped and single mothers that unfortunately don't have the training to do stuff, but we're even working on that.
Right, right. What about getting the community on board? I mean, this is a conversation, and you know, I'm not going to. I was thinking about coming into this interview that I wanted to ask questions that I know people have, and I think you're the right person to answer at least some of them. What about getting the community on board? And I'm not just talking about Canadian Indigenous communities or anywhere else in the world. If you develop an environment where there is high unemployment, I'll give an example. I have a friend that when communism fell in Ukraine, he said his parents had a very tough time because all of a sudden they had to go to the bank. It was a completely different setup than they were used to. There's a whole new economy now that's getting developed, that when they had gotten used to a system. How do you get your community, and it may be coming back to vision, but I'm very curious, how do you get a community if they've been stuck in a place, and I don't think Tahltan's was maybe as severe as some places, but if they're stuck in a way of doing something, maybe even it's because something's been done to them that's put them in this situation, but nevertheless, now they're in this situation. How do you get the community on board when you've got all this work to do, all this preparation, all this collaboration that needs to happen, which is a long, strenuous thing to undertake for anyone? How do you get everybody on board?
Well, the trick is not to try to get everybody on board. The trick is you get your leadership on board, and then they get the heads of families on board. And you start getting those people on board. And very soon, where the leaders go, it's like the figurehead on a Norseman ship, where the figurehead goes, the body goes. And so that's the trick. The trick is not to try to get everybody.
Right.
You just deal with the people that you think have the influence in the community that'll move this forward. Right. There was only 6 or 7 of us in the nation that started this. When I started the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation, started talking about this. But the thing was, the Tahltan people, you see, it was only in 1964 when welfare came into the nations, and I point blank pointed out, and I say it all the time, that was the ruination of the Aboriginal people, because prior to that, every single person who wanted to live had to work. And it was, in my opinion, the welfare system that destroyed the work ethics, et cetera, of the people, because in essence, what happened was women could have children and welfare would look after them, and then the man, in essence, was irrelevant except to help make the kid. And so when the Tahltan did this, we still had lots of people who came from the era before, who were all hardworking people, men and women. And so when I started talking about jobs and talking about working and whatnot, those people got up, and when they would say to their grandsons, you get off the couch there and you go to work, those kids listen. Right. That was the biggest thing for me. My biggest help was that we had a generation that was still alive prior to 1964, before the welfare economy, the welfare system took over. And we know now in Tahltan country, we broke that welfare culture in the Tahltan Nation forever, because now it's peer pressure. If some young guy isn't working and he goes out to with all these other young guys, when they come in from work, they say to him, how come you're not working? Yeah, no, it becomes reversed. The culture becomes you're chastised for not working. Yeah, where's your man? How come you're living off your mother and dad? What's the matter with you? Yeah. They have nothing to do with you. Well, pretty soon these young guys figured out that they better learn something, because we have more training programs and more dollars for training than anybody. So it's only you. You're the impediment yourself, not the system, not the company, not the band, not Indian Affairs. It's you. If you don't step up to the plate, it's all on you. And the young people are not ashamed to say that to their peers. Yeah. I want to point something out. It is all on them, but leadership has given them a platform. That it's not pull yourself up by your bootstraps and walk out to nowhere. It's pull yourself up by your bootstraps because there's an opportunity. That's correct. The Tahltan, we have our own Heritage Trust Fund, and the only money's coming out of that is for education. Any Tahltan person today that has a bona fide, legitimate course, be in university, apprenticeship, wherever, can apply for up to $10,000 from the Tahltan Trust Fund per year for 5 years. So in essence, there's $50,000 sitting there for any Tahltan by going through these and meeting all the requirements. So that's just for education. But there's the BC Industry Training Authority, I helped started the Aboriginal Apprenticeship Board for them. I sat on it for 10 years and just retired a couple of years ago from it. So there's monies available from them and training programs that we put in place, and things that we made sure to help Aboriginal youth and whoever wanted to get into the trades, ways to get into the trades. And we even put in prior experience. If you worked as a carpenter for 15, 20 years, and just because you don't have journeyman papers, you can come there and after we have mentors, we have people who can help you work through this stuff. And then you can go and you can write your exam. So you don't have to start at year one for apprentice carpentership, right? Because you got 15 years experience. Maybe you're at level 3. You might even be at level 4. You might be only need to take one more year of apprenticeship and you got your red seal. So I help put those kind of things in place. So there's absolutely no reason, in my opinion, for any young Aboriginal person, or in fact, any young person in Canada today, to not get the necessary training to enter the workforce. Yeah. Because the money is there and the programs are in place for them.
Yeah, and if they do them, the opportunity, the jobs are there. There's a real shortage. They're looking for people that have. I mean, we have companies coming on all the time that are looking for skilled labor. I'd say every second episode, off the camera, they're telling me that they're looking for people. Another question is about leadership. Is holding them accountable. Now, I asked this out of ignorance. I'm really not sure. In a company, if you have a large company, the size of a community, let's say, you have people that they're held accountable by doing their job. They're not coming from a family. Whereas if you're coming from a community like the Tahltan Nation, the 6 people, some of them might be related to each other. You've maybe grown up with the person, or how do you hold people accountable, especially when you get a lot of money coming in? That money can corrupt. You get major decisions that need to be made that can get people at each other. There's a lot that goes into keeping leadership together. How did you approach that?
Well, Tahltan is a very unique system. We could trace our whole nation back to 8 women. Okay. So we started a family line, and since we've been in the last 50, 60 years, 70 years, integrating, marrying into all cultures, it doesn't matter. We have every nation almost in the world in our nation, bloodline in our nation today. We ended up with 2 extra families. We said there'll be, instead of 8, we have 10 families. So every family has the right to pick their spokesperson. And those 10 people are the board of directors for the Tahltan central government. They are the ones who direct traffic for the Tahltan central government. And the Tahltan central government handles all rights and titles and all areas outside of the reserves. The chief and councils speak, and by law, their voice ends at the reserve boundary line. So we had to have a central government that'll take care of it. And so the president of the Tahltan central government works very closely with the 2 chiefs. And then he has to answer to the 10 board of directors. He is a vice president and a secretary treasurer also. Those people are elected. The 3 executive are elected at the General Assembly, and the 10 family members are elected by their own families. So that's how the Tahltans operate. So if I have a problem, I don't go to another family and talk to them about it. I just pick up the phone and I talk to my spokesperson. And they're always related to me because it's family.
Right.
So this, it just so happens to be my niece. So I pick up the phone and I say to my niece, I hear this is happening. Tell me about it. I want to know. And so, and in fact, her job is to have a meeting with our family, the Atsenley family, once a month. She has to upgrade us as to what's happening in the nation. And then if we feel that we're a very sophisticated family. We have an elders council. if there was 18 children, my grandmother and grandfather had 18 children that lived. So we have 18 elders on that elders council, one from every family line. My mother was the oldest of the Azurza family, and the oldest person in the family, and like my sister is older than I am, so she is now the elder representing my personal family.
Wow.
And so we have a very sophisticated system in the Tahltan Nation of how to deal with issues. And so because you're talking to your own family, they can't hide under the bed and say, well, no, I got to talk to somebody else about it. That's one of the things I've seen leaders all of my life in Aboriginal communities say at meetings, especially big meetings, and there's an important decision to be made, say, well, I got to go back and talk to my people. Well, you can't do that in our nation because I am your people. If my niece told me I got to go back talk to my people, I'd give her a smack in the side of the head. Say, wake up. You're talking to your people.
Right.
And that same thing goes with the other families. So when they get in the room, they talk they might have 10 different points of view, but they talk it out and say, what's the best for our nation?
Right. And then ultimately,
what's not best for the Tsenley family? What's best for the nation?
Right.
But it's above board. That the whole point is it's transparent. People can see.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I'm actually glad you just mentioned that, because that's the one thing is that you have these leadership. You said, you start with leadership, but there's still a transparency so that and this is something you're much better at communicating it than me. You've probably had a few more years to do it, is the importance of transparency. There's a fine line between everybody sitting there talking at once. That's unproductive. But if people know the direction, even if it's amazing how mature a 20-year-old can be if they are able to get the information. I really think it makes a huge difference, especially to a younger generation, to be trusted with proper information and proper leadership.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my niece is about half my age, yet she's the spokesperson for our family.
Jerry, what about you? I want to just pivot away from it a little bit going back to the youth. And I don't want to make this just about youth, because I think there's I do want to retract that, because I think a lot of times people talk about, major decisions in your life and, but people do major shifts in their lives when they're older. There's people that have accomplished unbelievable things in their 80s. So I don't want to just make it about youth. What are some major decisions in your life personally where those left and rights, where you could have gone a completely different area in life, that just would have taken in a I guess a worse direction, for lack of a better example? Are there some major decisions that you've made along the way at any age that you thought that was a major moment in my life? I could have gone left, but I chose to go on right, and it got us here, got me here, got our community here. Are there those things that stand out?
Sure. One of the biggest things was when I was 30 years old, when I quit drinking, quit smoking. I used to drink a bottle of scotch a day. I used to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day too. I don't do either of those, and I don't miss either one of them. 40 years now, over 40 years. That was a big decision. I used to make my living thinking, and I couldn't think anymore because the alcohol was causing problems. So I quit. I also quit for other reasons, for my family and whatnot, because I have 4 children and a wife. We've been together for 52 years now. So
congratulations.
The thing is, that was probably one of the biggest decisions. And then I went into project management and project development, took specialized courses. Those were big decisions for me, because I realized I was tired of working out in 40 below weather in construction and mining. And so I went into to be a manager as opposed to being a worker. Those were big decisions, big changes.
Were
then
those...
I had to learn to use a computer, and I had to learn to use all of this stuff.
I'm still learning that. That's
me too.
Is it, when you make a major shift like that, you start to learn the management skills, you put away the booze. And was that, how many years do you think that took before you sort of again, I'm making this a little bit personal. For me, I see some of the personal decisions I've made, and I thought it was going to be a quick change. It ends up taking a few years before it sort of recalibrates how you think and how you approach. For you, how long did it take before you thought you were sort of where you needed to be to really push, for your family, for your community, for yourself, where you thought when you made those pivotal decisions that you sort of had that edge back, or you had a new edge to move forward with for the rest of your life?
Well, it took me almost 10 years to gain the skills to earn the same kind of money I was making when I was a construction man and an underground
Really?
miner.
10 years.
In management. But after that, I didn't look back, because then I started to develop programs and learned how to do that. But it took me at least 10 years. So I was over 40 before I really got working in with tribal councils and with Aboriginal bands, and building things up and doing business as a business service officer, assisting First Nations start businesses, et cetera, and individuals. But it was at least 10, 15 years before I was really fully comfortable doing it. And then I started the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation in 1985. And then, of course, I was there till 1996. So it was over 20 years developing that. And we did everything we wanted to with that company. It was the vehicle that carried the Tahltan Nation out of the doldrum we were in.
And it still carries forward today. I need to highlight something. It's actually, to be completely honest, I don't know much about the award, but I saw in your bio the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, and I mean, that's quite an honor to be given. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that even came to be?
Well, that came from the Mining Association of Canada and PDAC, because I worked with it. I was a co-founder of the Canadian Aboriginal Minerals Association, and I was the vice president for 23 and a half years. And it was our efforts working with the mining companies to be talking to Aboriginal people. I also helped. It was from CAMA, Canadian Aboriginal Mineral Association. I was the lead liaison when we did the Aboriginal Toolkit for Mining. We did it. We released it in 2006, and that year we won the Canadian National Award for the best Aboriginal mine training document in Canada. And in 2007, that document won the International Award from UNESCO for the best Aboriginal mine training document in the world. And so those are kind of things that they added up, and they saw what I did with the Golden Bear, and the next negotiation was with SK Mine, and how far we had moved the Tahltans forward. And so in essence, that was one of the reasons that I received the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Award.
Well, it's quite an honor. So congratulations for that. It
Thank
really
you.
is. I want to ask you to sort of turn it on to a bigger scale of mining in Canada. I come from a community that has had mines go forward around it and has shut down mines. Do you think communities, and I don't mean specifically Indigenous communities, although that's obviously included, are communities, it's really taking a long time for mines to get going. And I wonder, when you see it, I'm sure you watch the same news I do and sort of follow some of these stories. Where is the gap? What is happening? Either do you see, is it a federal issue, a local issue? Is it the mines, the way they're approaching it? Should it take 10, 15 years to get a mine going, or should they or are they going into places that they shouldn't be going into? Like, what is your perspective on it? Because it's a major issue in the mining industry, and it's pulling away the investors out of it. They're going into things like tech, and just things that just don't take as long to get going. It's a major issue. So what do you sort of see?
Well, in my opinion, there's too many NGOs really muddy the waters.
Mm.
The Galore Creek mine, which is just off the Stikine River, it's on a river called the Scud River, and it's very close, within 5 miles of the Stikine River. And the Stikine River has 5 species of salmon and steelhead trout run in it. It's an international river, so it flows into Alaska. It has probably 55 feet of snow a year there. And so there's probably every potential, and also has, because there's sulfides in there, it has acid generating rock, what gives acid generation. So you have a problem with potential acid generating waters contamination, on and on. You probably have every single potential environmental problem you could have. And working with, when we did the Galore project, working with Nova Gold, when we'd go to a meeting, we'd say, this is what we see. And the Alaskans were sitting there, the BC government was sitting there, and all these people sitting there. And we'd say, we see these as an issue and we need to have answers for it. Well, within a week, we got those answers back. And so then we'd call another meeting. That project only took 18 months to receive its environmental certification. And so when people say to me, you know, we have to be 3, 4, 5 years doing this, in my opinion, somebody's either not asking the right questions, or somebody is not given information in a timely manner.
Right.
So it's on both sides. But with the Nova Gold, when we asked questions, we wanted information, we had it.
Right.
Within a week, 10 days, we had it. And we had another meeting. It was like the Diavik Diamond Mine. Diavik Diamond Mine had 257 community meetings, but they wrote 5 agreements, 4 with First Nations and 1 with the Inuvialuit. And they made it work.
Right.
So it's a two-way street. If you can ask the right questions and then get the answers for them, you can make the serious decisions. You don't have to drag it on and on and on and on. So that's my opinion, what happens. Sometimes, in my opinion, it's the mining companies that cause their own problems. And sometimes it's the people asking the questions of the companies that are the problem.
Yeah.
And so it's both ways. We didn't try to be cute when we were doing the Galore project. We had the Tahltan Heritage Environmental Assessment Team. The acronym is THREAT. We have 23 people on that committee, and everyone has a different discipline. I was on the committee as an elder, but also on for construction, anything to do with roads, transmission lines, and open pits. And we had hydrologists, we had biologists, we had lawyers, we had social workers on there because of the social impact that were going to happen. And so when we asked questions, we weren't trying to be cute. We wanted answers so we could mitigate some of the potential problems down the road.
Yeah.
And the company very quickly answered every one of our questions. They didn't try to stall. They didn't try to be cute. And at the end of the day, it only took 18 months to get that EA certificate.
Which is almost unheard of nowadays.
It's unheard of. You couldn't do that.
Yeah. Jerry, I appreciate giving our time. We're creeping towards the hour here, and I hope it's not the last time that we discuss these things. I was curious, do people, if people in other communities are hearing, do you deal directly with communities still, or sort of what's your position if people want some advice or some of your opinion and to take a look at it? Are you actively doing that, or do you have someone that you direct them to? How does that work?
Well, I started a development. The Global Indigenous Development Trust, to the lawyer, business partner, Sonia Molodecki. She's a lawyer by training that is in the mining industry, and she was trying to, because she was doing a lot of work in South America and Latin America, she was looking for some model to help move things forward. And her company had a booth at CAMA in Vancouver. And as vice president, I was there, and I'd meet with all of the people who were sponsoring and who had booths and stuff. And we got talking, and she realized that the Tahltan model could be something that would work. So we, in essence, started the Global Indigenous Development Trust. And that's why I spoke at CIM. I mentioned the Global Indigenous Development Trust. So now we're working with communities and individuals and mining companies around the world doing this and giving them my practical advice. And of course, heard from the legal side and stuff that she's learned as well.
Yeah. Well, I hope that so people could get in touch with you, or actually off air, or I'll get some information where people can either get in touch with her or you, or because I know there are people that want to they want to have a better understanding of how they should approach within their community.
Yes.
So I hope they get in touch with you. Jerry,
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed talking to you at CIM, but within that format, of course, there's certain topics that were fitting for that environment. And so I appreciate you giving me a chance to ask all the other questions I didn't get a chance to ask.
Great.
Okay. Thank you very
appreciated.
much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Gowdy, one of these interviews, I don't think the audience needs a lot to add from me. I think Jerry pretty much covered it. I don't think I'll add a lot of value with my comments. So I'm glad he came on. He has, again, we could give different examples. Some of the stories, I had my notes of some of the deals that Jerry had put together in that. We could do 3-4 shows on it. But Gowdy, where can people, we'll put contact information for Jerry, but also where can people follow, subscribe to Crownsman?
All right. Well, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got tons of new episodes on there. Don't forget to share and like, of course. You can also contact us, info@crownsman.com, if you would like to be part of one of the shows, or you would like to suggest someone to be part of the show. That's info@crownsman.com.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We will see you on the next episode, and we've got quite a few of them coming up, of Mining Now.